picture taken by one of my dearest, I just love this young lady so much, so proud of her, Megan, and at her farm in Northeast Arkansas. I like to call it divine droplets. Look at those little droplets of water around. Isn't that beautiful? I'll tell you why I'm starting off with this at the end, so you need to stick around. It's a really cool climax to this particular section of Scripture. I think you'll appreciate it, but we're going to start off with a beautiful, ain't God cool picture, and then I'll tell you why at the end of this thing, all right? But we're here for the book of Revelation, and we're going to study Revelation chapter 4, verses 9 through 11 this afternoon. I pray that it will be a blessing to you. It really has been a blessing to me as I've studied through it. Now, I want to say this by way of opening. A lot of what I'm about to cover is review, okay? Just because that's the way the text plays out. But as we conclude the chapter, you're going to see some stuff that really applies. This is a crazy awesome chapter about the throne room of heaven. And so we're going to add another factor to the throne room of heaven towards the end of this thing. So stay with me, okay? Just stay with me. All right, here is what we have covered thus far as we began last week talking about the specifics of the throne room of heaven, verses 6 through 8. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, 4 living creatures full of eyes, front and behind. The living creature like a lion, one was like an ox, one was like the face of a man, another like an eagle in flight. 4 living creatures, each of them 6 wings, full of eyes, etc., okay? And they are saying day and night, they never cease to say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Very similar kind of thing is going to take place with regards to the 24 elders in our context. Hi, Greg Geppert, I love you. Thank you so much for being with me. Oh, it's Dylan. And I think that's his grandson at Hagerstown Park. Well, look at there. I appreciate that. I guess that's in Maryland. And there's, of course, Debbie, who's one of my most faithful. I appreciate Debbie so very, very much. All right, so here's where we were last week. But what I want you to see again is we got the 4 living creatures, and they are going to never cease all eternity over and over, day and night. It's that holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Now, what we're going to find is that the 24 elders basically are going to do the same thing, okay? So here's our text for this evening. Oh, and may I say, let me go back just real quickly so that we can make sure that if you're part of the School of Biblical Studies, as you know, I have begun putting the questions. I'm trying to put it on every one of the slides, okay, if it's Sunday night and Wednesday night in our particular study. So here are the questions that we're going to work through in our text this evening. And if you're part of the School of Biblical Studies, these are the 7 questions that you receive in the email on Friday, so that you can answer them after watching this particular video. And so I pray that you'll take advantage of that. You recognize what's happening there and get ready, okay? All right, so that was last week. Last week we had that opening scene with regards to what is taking place in the throne room of heaven. This evening, as we conclude the chapter 4, we want to see the rest of the text. And this is the end of the first chapter. Revelation 4, verses 9 through 11. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, etc., notice this idea of glory and honor comes twice. Again, I take you to the passage prior to this where they were saying holy, holy, holy repeatedly, okay? And so the idea is that in the presence of God, in the throne room of heaven, the background noise, if you want to call it that, whatever, is holy, holy, holy. And in addition to that, worthy are you, Lord God, glory and honor, etc., etc. In other words, everything about the throne room of heaven is focused upon God, and it is focused upon giving him honor, glory, etc. We're going to see that as they cast their crowns before his throne, etc., later in the context tonight. And so everything about it has to do with this idea of the glory of God. Tying to that, again, learning the Bible, interpret the Bible, you'll notice this is the text that we just read prior to this. This is verse 8, prior to this. 4 living creatures, etc., and all day long they're saying, holy, holy, holy. So you see, holy, 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 glory and honor. That is the context of heaven. Everything about the presence of God has to do with his glory and his honor. Okay? And then as you continue on, you notice that this honor and thanks is being addressed towards the one who is seated on the throne. This is the clue that Gabriel drew for us to understand what chapter 4, to remember what chapter 4 is all about. We're still working on that book, Revelation Realization. But that's the clue for chapter 4. You see the 4 upside down, it's the throne. Okay, that's the way you remember chapter 4. Well, in Acts chapter 7, another passage to illuminate this, but he, that is Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. It's interesting that he sees the heavens open. Very similar to what John gets in the opening of this chapter when he was in the Spirit and this invitation to come up here and come into the presence of God, that kind of thing. Well, evidently prior to this, years prior to this, Stephen, one of the first Christian martyrs, as he is being stoned, he's going to have a similar experience where he gazes towards the heavens and it's like a door has been opened, as it were, and the heavens opened up to him and he sees Jesus standing at the right hand of God. The reason that's significant in our context is because notice here that the glory and honor and the thanks that is being constantly stated is toward the one who's seated on the throne. That's not specifically Jesus. Now, it is Jesus because Jesus is God, but as you're looking at the specifics with regards to the Godhead, that is evidently the Father image who is sitting upon the throne, and according to Acts chapter 7, Jesus is standing beside the throne. Now, to complicate things even more, because like I say, it's hard for our little mind to get it all in there, you might recall, as we've been studying through the book of Revelation, that we're going to find a moment where Jesus is actually going to say that he sits on the throne with his Father. His Father invited him to sit on the throne with him. And then later, Jesus is going to say, and I'm inviting you to sit on the throne with me as I sit on the throne with my Father. Meaning, evidently, it's a pretty good-sized throne. But we're all going to have this invitation to reign with Christ as he reigns with his Father. It's going to be amazing, as I've said so many times. Please don't miss it for the world. You know what I'm saying? Especially not for this world. Don't miss it. But Acts chapter 7, we got Jesus standing beside the throne. And God, Revelation 4, is seated on that throne. God the Father is seated on that throne. Okay? And again, the clue that Gabriel presented, I think is pretty awesome. All right? I know we're just kind of bopping through this thing. I'll pause as we get down here to this paragraph that's hidden behind this little piece of parchment in just a second. All right. So honor and thanks, etc., it's targeted to the one who's seated on the throne, and then this one who's seated on the throne is designated as somebody who lives forever and ever. That's twice in our context, who lives forever and ever. We've already seen that in Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, as the whole thing was being introduced to us, that this message is from, I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and was and who is to come, the Almighty. Alpha and Omega. First letter of the Greek alphabet, last letter of the Greek alphabet. My son Gabriel and that young lady who that picture at the entrance that took it, that young lady Megan, on Wednesday nights, right before our School of Biblical Studies class, they are watching a video together as they're trying to learn the Greek language. And one of the opening things is for them to learn the Greek alphabet. And the instructor who is teaching them the Greek alphabet has this crazy little song. I can't sing it, so don't get your, I'm not going to. But it has to do, it starts with alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, etc. And it comes through and they memorize the entire Greek alphabet. It's really kind of cute to hear them. In fact, this morning in our home church, I made them sing it. They didn't like me, but I made them sing it. But alpha and omega, first letter, last letter, all that's being said there, obviously, is I am the beginning and the end. I'm the bookends of all that is important, God is going to say. I am the alpha and he's not really even literally the Alpha and the Omega because he was there before Alpha. And he'll be there a long time after Omega. See what I'm saying? He is present tense. He is past tense. And he is future tense. He just is. That's why when he sends Moses back to the people there in Egypt, and Moses said, well, who am I going to tell him sent me? And God says, you just tell him the I am sent you. Meaning, I am just simply present tense. I am. That's really pretty much all you need to know. Which causes me to I'm going to share a personal with you. I know this may sound just a little odd or weird, but in my prayer time, God and I are pretty tight in our discussions. I mean, we just really talk it out. And I was just laying there in my bed the other day, and I was thinking, as I think I was about to get up from my nap, whatever, and I was praying, and I was thinking about something that maybe you've thought of before, but maybe you've never stopped and really given it as much consideration as you need to, because it seems so simple, and yet really it is so profound. Think of this. You have been given the right to exist. God could do a lot for us, and he does. I live in the richest nation on the planet, got the best wife a man could possibly have, children that I love and are faithful to the Lord, wonderful little home church family, on and on I can go with that. I got a heritage out the wahoozy as far as my mom and dad are concerned. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, I am absolutely spoiled, okay? But if you took all of that away, and all I really got was the opportunity to exist. it would be enough, or at least it should be enough for me to praise him and to thank him. That will tie into my conclusion this evening. Okay, so hang on to that very thought. All right, you get to exist. You got to draw your first breath. And depending on how old you are, I'm tapping on 58. 58 years of drawing breath, seeing the scenes of God, hearing things with my ears that he allows. I get to exist. If there was nothing more than that, it ought to just simply draw us to him and cause us to fall at his feet and say, holy, holy, holy. Okay? Hang on to that thought. As I end this thing, you're going to see how it all ties together. But he is a forever being, illustrated by this idea, I am the beginning and the end, the book ends, etc. But more than that, I am forever and ever. Okay? Then, there is the 24 elders. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here reviewing the 24 elders because we did that last week. But remember that as you talk about the 24 elders, you are tying them together with the four living creatures, okay? Because the four living, as described here in the earlier passage that we read a couple times now. All right, so you got the four living creatures, and they seem to be like almost like the bodyguards of God, like he needs a bodyguard, but they seem to be standing around almost in a guard-like posture. Then you got the 24 elders, and they are seated on thrones all around, except for the moments when they're on their face, which is in our context here, okay? They got thrones, indicates earlier that they actually sit on them. I'm not sure when that happens because it seems like that they are constantly in an eternal mode of casting their crowns before the throne of God. But however that plays out in God's presence, we'll see it eventually, okay? In that time frame, because we're probably not going to understand it down here in this time frame. But we now have the 24 elders. Remember, the 24 elders, I believe, are representative of the 12 tribes of Israel, thus it represents Israel, and the 12 apostles, thus it represents the church. I think the 24 elders is actually representative of all of God's faithful coming into one context, okay? Because remember, it was never God's only intention to honor the Jew. In fact, honoring Israel was something that played out because the rest of the world rejected him. Remember the Noah scenario. You've got the first 2,000 years of our existence on this planet, basically, that's dominated by God just seeking his people. Didn't matter who you were, didn't matter the color of your skin, where you were geographically, etc. He was seeking after you. And that's the Adams and the Noahs and the Enochs and the etc. Okay? But then he looks down, and obviously we're not getting it. And so the next 2,000 years is being spent under a covenant system with Abraham. And that covenant will be sealed with blood, and there'll be a circumcision that takes place, etc. And so from Abraham all the way through Jesus, we're under this new covenant, this different covenant, which is more specific to a particular group of people. Now, that doesn't mean that the Gentiles didn't have access to God, but essentially, if a Gentile wanted to come to the one true God, he first had to become a Jew. Because God has zeroed in his attention, because the whole planet's not getting it. So I'm going to zero in on this particular lineage of Abraham. My mom loves that word, lineage. This particular lineage of Abraham. And that family is going to then, throughout the years, produce children that will eventually lead to the producing of Jesus Christ. Okay? At that point, Jesus sets up a new covenant. Okay? Remember, we got a covenant with Abraham, right? Now we're changing that. Now it's a new covenant. And this new covenant fulfills the covenant of Abraham, and it puts him, that is Jesus, as the Messiah in the place to reign over this new covenant that we are now living within, okay? Well, that new covenant is represented by 12 apostles. Just like the old covenant is represented by 12 children of Israel. Jacob is going to be a descendant of Abraham, right? Okay. Israel, they're the ones who went down to Egypt and they multiplied. So you got 12 and 12, which makes 24. I think that's what is being said here. That God then, at the end of the Christian age, we introduce now the combination age, if you want to call it that, of all of God's faithful are now coming into one context. So all of his faithful, I think, are represented by the 24 elders. Okay, I think we've done enough with that. Let's move on. All right. Then we're going to notice here, and this is where we're starting to get into a little bit more new material now. Okay, so now the 24 elders are going to fall down before him who is seated on the throne. So they are falling down before him. And this is, like I say, where as far as our little mind is concerned, we can't put it all together as far as the time frame is concerned. Because we know they got thrones, we know that they're sitting on their thrones at some point, but in this context, they're falling on their faces. So they fall down in front of him. I want to make a really strong point about this idea of bowing before people. In this context, they are bowing before the Creator as they should. Okay? In Revelation 22, 8 through 9, I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things, and they're amazing. And when he heard and he saw them, he says, when I heard and I saw them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed them to me. But he said to me, you must not do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers and the prophets and with those who keep the words of this book. Worship God. It's very important that we understand that the worship has to be pointed toward God, not his representatives. The reason this is significant is, I think, it is possible, I believe, to bow before someone without worshiping that someone. It can be a cultural technique, whatever. I believe that's possible. We find that takes place with regards to Israel, Jacob, and the boys that are being brought in before him for a blessing, etc. So the whole idea of bowing before somebody is not necessarily the point. It's bowing in a motion of worship. And I want to take you to the Pope, okay? Now, I have recently been in some lengthy discussions with some individuals who were adamant that we are not worshiping the Pope when we bow before him. But I just need you to consider the context here. You got a guy who people just throng to. They can't wait to bow down before, and they want to kiss his ring, and they want to give up. Many of these are folks who are living in poverty. They want to give up what little money they have so that he can go back home and live in a gated palace that is full of materialistic carnalism. And in that setting, I'm supposed to assume that they're not really worshiping him. They're just going through some kind of a cultural respect kind of a thing. I think it's hogwash. I think that what we have in Catholicism is a process of worshiping a man. And I'm going to suggest to you that if John, an inspired writer of God, arguably the best friend of Jesus, is not allowed to bow before an angel, then for Pete's sake, we ought to get off our knees and not bow before the Pope or any other living being as far as worship is concerned. Amen. So, when you see this passage, recognize this. I made the point earlier. Catholics just can't get around this. They argue and they'll hum and they'll do their best. But here's the point you need to understand. You need to listen to me closely. The biggest failure of Catholicism is carnalism. Everything seems to emphasize the carnal side of the world. Now, in that process, they try to usurp the authority of God. They'll even call, by this one I didn't mention, they'll even call this guy who they're bowing before, kissing his ring, and supporting his materialistic lifestyle. They'll call him the Holy Father, but they're not worshiping him. Really? Really? Really important for us to recognize that what's taking place here is that Jesus says that the Son of Man, me, Jesus, I don't even have a place to lay my head. But then we have later on the Pope, who is supposed to represent Jesus on earth, and he not only has a place to lay his head, he's got royal guards all around about him, silk pillows, and all of those kind of things. How is he even close to representing the image of Jesus Christ in his carnal materialism? He ain't. If you're part of the Catholic movement, I beg of you to consider what you're supporting here, because John wasn't even allowed to bow down before an angel. Certainly you ought not be bowing down before the Pope. And then we come to this phrase, and you'll notice my big red question mark, because I don't know. They cast their crowns before the throne. Now, I understand what that means to cast your crown before the throne, and I know what it means to cast. I've done a lot of fishing. I know what it means to throw a football, to throw a baseball. So I know what it means to throw something. That's not the point. My point is, why describe it as casting? Now, I'm told that the NIV actually says, I think it says, lays their crowns before the throne. But in this, and we actually have a religious group called Casting Crowns, so most of you are familiar with that as well. My question, though, is this. In presenting their crowns to the throne, or more specifically to God, and they place them there before the throne, why are they doing that? They've clearly been honored by God to sit on these 12 thrones. They're clearly in his presence, and God could have zapped them to, hell and back, if he wanted to, but he didn't. He allows them to be in the presence. It said, and so why are they giving up their crowns to the personage of the Father? And I presented that to my study group this morning in our home church, and they had some wonderful ideas. But I'm curious from you. Do you have any thoughts? You can comment right now if you want to, as to why are we casting our crowns? Second question I'll ask you. Why does it seem to indicate that they are casting their crowns? I think the Greek word specifically represents this idea that they're eager to give up their crowns to the throne. Okay? So what is it about casting? It seems to be more than just placing them at the foot of the throne. It's actually, I'm eager to make sure that it gets there. What's that all about? I'm going to give you a few moments to comment on that as I move on, then we're going to come back to it. I'm going to ask you what's happening here, okay? Then, as we come to the near conclusion of this thing, notice that he's going to they cast their crowns before the throne. I'm asking you to comment on that. Then you're going to notice what they're going to say is, worthy are you. Worthy are you. And the reason they are worthy, or he is worthy, is because that red arrow got off. It's supposed to be pointing to the word for here. Specifically, it's going to say that your worthiness, God, comes about because of the fact that you created all things. You are the creator, therefore you deserve to have our praise. You are worthy. The reason you're worthy is because of, that's what the word for, you created all things. And the 24 elders are saying that. Okay, now let's back up. Does anybody have a comment with regards to this idea of why they are casting their crowns before the throne? Nobody's commented out there. Dad, you got an idea with regards to the whole idea of casting? I get the idea of placing, but why cast their crowns before the throne?
It shows an emotion that they have.
Good.
Inside. They just are overwhelmed, and they're willing to give up the thing that is the greatest accomplishment that they are. I think that's what a crown represents.
Good, good. I think that's excellent. Anybody else? I think that part of the whole idea tying in with that is there's almost this overwhelming reluctance to let it sit on my head. I am so unworthy that it's like, no, I can't do that. I just can't. My good friend Bill in our home church this morning made a point that, and he said, I preface this and that it sounds a little odd and I doubt it's even right, but I want you to think about it. And it makes a lot of sense. We often talk about the crown of our head being right up here. What do you expose to the throne whenever you bow? Is it not the crown of your head? And he's saying that perhaps I just am anxious to get on my knees. I'm anxious to cast my crown in your direction, Father. I thought that was an interesting idea. Anybody? Anybody out there? Mom says, good stuff. Keep preaching. Thank you, Mom. I appreciate it. She's sitting right over there and she's texting me on the thing. I love it. Anyhow, casting your crowns before the throne. So I think gathered together everything that has just been said here, I think you put that all in one pile, and whatever it means, it's more than just laying it at the feet of God, I think. I think it has to do with this emotion like Dad was talking about, that they're just overwhelmed with something. And I think part of the emotion is that I just can't keep this on my head. I don't deserve this. Now, let me take you to a timing problem here, okay? And again, this is God's realm, so you and I aren't going to be able to get it. But watch this. We know they're seated on crowns, they're seated on thrones, but now we got them on their face, and they're casting their crowns, and it seems like that they're casting their crowns repeatedly throughout eternity as they say this. How does their crown get back on their head for them to cast it the next time? I don't know. And again, is it, taking my buddy Bill's perspective, is it a repetitive kind of a kneeling? I cast my crown. I cast my crown. That is it possibly that? Or is it, let me just get plumb weird, is it that I cast my crown before the throne of God and bing, it comes back to my head again. And I cast it before because God, no, I don't deserve, bing, and there it is again. That would not be unlike God, to constantly pursue me with such honor, a man who does not deserve to have such honor. I don't know. That's why the big red question mark here. But I think it's tantalizing to consider what in the world world is happening with this idea of casting their crowns. And if they are representing us in the sense that we've got the 12 tribes of Israel, we've got the 12 apostles, again, the church and the Jews, and it comes together, if they're representing us, then that's us. That we are constantly in a mode of, God, I don't deserve this, but bing, and it's back. And God says, yeah, maybe not, but I want you to wear it. Bing, and it says, oh God, bing, you know, back and forth, back and forth. Maybe that's it. All right, let's come back to this then. I want to take that off. This is the full statement then of the 24 elders, and this is the climax that I wanted you to see. The 24 elders are going to be casting their crowns, and this is what they're going to say. Much like the 4 living creatures, holy, 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 24 elders, worthy are you. Glory and honor, etc. Very similar kind of ideas, okay? Worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory, honor, and power because you created things, all things, and by your will they exist and were created. So the glory and honor reference and the casting of crowns event is because he's the creator. Now, I need you to recognize, and certainly John would say this, I'm sure, but God's far more than just the creator. But in this context, as John presents it, according to what the 24 elders are saying, from their perspective, the thing that really ties this together as far as the glory and honor of God is that he's the creator. Now that makes sense, does it not? As I tie it back into my introduction where I talked about the fact that you even exist. The fact that you have breath, the fact that you have life, the fact that you have existence, it would then draw you to the thing that I'm most thankful for is that you created me. Now for the 24 creatures, I get them. So you got 4 living creatures, 24 elders. Let me start all over again. So for the 4 living creatures, they are created also, it seems, but they are different in that they're already in the context of God, etc., and their perspective seems to be honor. Holy, holy, holy. That seems to be the thing that they want to throw towards the throne. Whereas these folks who represent the Israel and the church, in my mind, they want to throw before the throne the fact that you're worthy because you're the creator. Now, if that's true, then here's the climax of my lesson. And it's what they said. Worthy are you because you created all things, okay? Now, I want to take you to Romans chapter 1. And again, that red arrow is supposed to be over here, worthy to 4. I don't know why that messed up. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by the unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them. Really? Yeah, it's plain. That's what the text says. Because, this is the reason it's plain. Because God has shown it to them. Well, how did you do that, God? Well, I'm glad you asked. For his invisible attributes, that means the stuff that you can't see, namely his eternal power and divine nature, they have been clearly seen or clearly perceived. So that which you can't see has been seen. That's complicated. How is it possible that that which is invisible can't be seen has now been seen? Well, I'm glad you asked because he goes on to explain it. That which that which is invisible is now clearly perceived, and ever since the creation of the world, that's so in the things that have been made, so that we are without excuse. So God is obvious in creation. Now, there's a couple things that you have to recognize here. Number one, that which is invisible is seen in creation. It's a lot like the wind blows. You don't see the wind, but you see the effects of the wind. The same thing is true here with God. You don't see God, but you see the effects of God. So you want to spend time with God, you want to be with God, you go into that which he has created, and once you're there, and all of us have been to one degree or another, then you are without excuse. Meaning, 2 things. 1, God is obvious in what he creates. 2, because he's obvious in what he creates, you have no excuse. If you've ever seen a rose, if you've ever smelled the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle, if you've ever heard the chirping of a bird, if you've ever felt the wind as it passes by your cheek, if you've had any of those sensations in what you know of creation, you are now without excuse because you've got enough information to begin the journey of Acts chapter 17, 26 and 27 that says that our job is to seek him and to reach out for him. No one on the planet has an excuse. No one. So I then leave you with this crazy awesome picture again, taken by my good friend Megan, at her farm. Again, I call it the divine droplets. Ain't God cool? Yes, he is cool because his invisible attributes are seen. Now, that flower is not God, but that flower cannot be without God. And so, whenever my dear friend Megan took that picture, she had a God moment. She was in the presence of God. And her little heart jumped, and awe filled her existence. My God did that. And she had a God moment. And so it's not that the world doesn't experience God. They do every time they draw in a breath. It's that they deny the experience is of God. That's it. That's why I say there is no such thing as an atheist. There are people living in denial, but as far as atheism is concerned, we are without excuse because all you got to do is look out the window and see the created sphere that God has presented to us. So no one has an excuse because we've all seen the beauty of a flower. We've all smelled the fragrance of honeysuckle. We've all fill in the blanks. We're without excuse. So what's the application then to the book of Revelation as we conclude chapter 4? It's simply this. You over the last several weeks have had a glimpse into the very throne room of your Father, a place you will go if you're faithful. And as you enter into that scenario, I suspect you're going to do more than what the 24 elders are represented doing there. I think the experience will be so overwhelming that I suspect the first 1,000,000 years of eternity, you're just going to be an entire emotional basket case. I really do. I think that you will cry for the first 1,000 years. Now, these will not be tears of sorrow. They will be tears of overwhelmedness, if that's a word. I think that because look at it. You look at that and you say, wow. And as the little Elijah said this morning in our home church scenario, he said, but that's not even the best that God can do. How can he do better than that? Believe me, he can. And one day you're going to go into the presence of God, and I believe it. I think that it's just going to be so overwhelming that you're just going to lose your breath for 1,000 years. You're just going to be, oh, I can't believe it. And you're going to want to fall on your face and cry. And probably weep at the fact that God loved you enough that he would send his only begotten son so that you could have salvation. It's going to be overwhelming. So may I say it one last time as I end this thing. Don't miss heaven for the world. Please make sure that you're focused on be there. Matthew 16:26.
Fantastic stuff.
I
I was
think
thinking